Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. She stood at the edge of a boundless field, covered in a thick carpet of grass. A light gust of wind gently played with her hair. The midday sun shone in the azure purity of the sky. Sarah's gaze was fixed on the horizon line. There, barely visible, a tiny dot appeared. It grew rapidly, taking on the outline of a human figure. Sarah knew who it was and was waiting for this meeting. She had come here specifically for her. The dot grew larger, and now it had turned into a girl running towards her. Sarah smiled. It was her. Long, light brown curls, laughing eyes the color of light caramel, a scattering of freckles, a slightly upturned nose, graceful thin arms and legs. The girl was strikingly similar to Sarah, her own living copy. Next to her, Sarah felt a previously unknown happiness and absolute calm. They never exchanged words, only smiles, touches of hands, cheerful laughter. Sometimes they ran somewhere together. Sometimes they just sat on an old boulder, watching the life of nature. At times they wandered around the surroundings, exploring the world around them. Sarah clearly understood. These meetings took place in the space of dreams. Her friend appeared quite often, especially in early childhood, but not every night. Sometimes once a month, sometimes 3 times a week. Sarah always anticipated these dreams with special trepid. They differed from ordinary ones. Too real, too tangible, and most importantly, they never disappeared from memory after waking up, as happened with other dreams. Sarah could not remember the moment of their first meeting. It seemed that this dream friend had always existed. At first, both were tiny tots. The girls grew and changed synchronously, maturing at the same time. Now they were 14. No longer children, but not yet women. Tall, slender, slightly angular teenagers. It was a pity that these magical dreams ended quickly and abruptly. And now a sharp sound tore Sarah from the world of dreams. She found herself in her own bed. Next to her sat the cat, Oscar. He awkwardly jumped onto the bedside table, knocking over a glass of pencils. It was this clatter that caused her to wake up. Well, now it's unknown when to expect the next dream with the girlfriend. But definitely not today, Sarah thought. She stroked the cat. He immediately purred like a tiny tractor and settled comfortably on the bedside table. Now he would guard her sleep until morning. The girl smiled and turned on to her other side. She needed to fall asleep again quickly. She had to get up early tomorrow. The holidays were over. For some time, Sarah lay thinking about these amazing dreams. Before, it seemed to her that everyone had such friends who came to their dreams for years. This girl, whose name remained a mystery, had long become an integral part of her life, something familiar and natural. But as she grew older, Sarah realized that her friends sometimes had strange, fantastic, often confusing dreams. But the characters in them constantly changed. No one else had anything like hers, a longtime dream friend. "Oh, you're making it all up. You're just lying," sneered the spiteful Brittany. The other girls didn't argue, apparently not believing Sarah either. Since then, the girl told no one about her dreams, not even her closest friends. And she concluded for herself, friends do not come to other people in dreams. What happened to her was a rarity, which others obviously found hard to believe. Her parents. At the thought of them, Sarah smiled warmly. She was incredibly lucky. The girl grew up in an atmosphere of boundless love and acceptance, and it had always been that way. Sarah's mother and father were older than most of her peers' parents. Only later did she realize that she was a late and very long-awaited child, therefore immeasurably loved, perhaps even a little spoiled, to be honest. There was always plenty in their family, and Sarah had everything from a very young age, as soon as she hinted at it. Well, or almost everything. Expensive toys, beautiful clothes, trips to the circus and concerts, exciting travels. When it was time to go to school, a uniform was ordered for the girl from the most famous dressmaker in the city. The boring gray pinafore required by the gymnasium's rules was transformed by the craftswoman into an elegant and refined outfit. Her parents, without a doubt, spoiled their only daughter. Grandparents, uncles, and aunts actively helped them in this. Sarah was the only child in the entire large family, like that Billy from the famous cartoon, and she, like the hero of the poem, was loved and cherished. But apparently, they raised her correctly after all. Having everything, Sarah never showed arrogance. She always had many friends, and her parents deliberately accustomed her to independence, and despite boundless love, imposed certain requirements. Good grades, attendance at extra classes and sections, obedience. And yet, her mother and father could never fulfill Sarah's main dream. From about the age of 4, the girl persistently begged them to give her a little sister. She dreamed of another girl appearing in the family. She could play with her, share secrets, laugh together, just like with that dream friend. Sarah would braid her hair, share toys, teach her everything: how to read, dress beautifully, play different games. They would walk together, holding hands. Life would become much more joyful and interesting. To have someone so dear, so close, right there. Sarah would have agreed to a brother too, or even better, 2 little brothers or sisters at once. After all, people do have twins. But her parents never fulfilled this dream. As she got a little older, Sarah understood. It was too late. Her mother and father were close in age to her friend's grandparents, and they had her themselves at a rather mature age. Probably, this wasn't by chance. Now from movies and TV shows, the girl knew that sometimes people just couldn't have a child. It seemed her parents had exactly this difficulty. One day, luck smiled on them. They had a daughter. On that, the gifts of fate, apparently, dried up. Sarah adored her father and was very close to her mother. Complete mutual understanding reigned in their family. The girl couldn't remember ever being seriously punished. Usually she shared all her secrets and worries with her parents. And yet, for some reason, she never dared to tell them about the girl from her dreams. Perhaps she was afraid that her mother and father would start convincing her that it was just a figment of her imagination, or even worse, would get scared and take her to psychologists. No, let this girl remain only her secret. Sarah herself, having grown up a little, began to build various hypotheses about her dream friend. Sometimes it seemed to her that the imaginary friend was her unrealized dream of a sister. Sometimes she imagined that at night she met with her inner self. It was no wonder the girl was her absolute copy. And sometimes she even fantasized about parallel worlds, a transition between which occasionally opened in her dreams, and the girl was precisely from there, from another dimension of time and space. In a word, Sarah had many theories and reflections. Sarah adjusted the blanket and hugged her soft bear tighter. Yes, at 14, she still liked to sleep with plush toys and was not at all ashamed of it, unlike many of her peers. Sarah was not in a hurry to part with childhood. With soft toy animals, she felt cozier, calmer, more pleasant. And then there was Oscar the cat purring right next to her. Pure idle. Her parents were still awake. They often stayed up late, talking or watching a movie together. How friendly her mother and father were. And this was wonderful. Sarah valued the peace and harmony that reigned in their home, because by the age of 14, she had already seen her friends' families fall apart, and even witnessed ugly quarrels and arguments between other people's parents. Fortunately, in their cozy nest, such things never happened. Now her parents were quietly talking about something. Music from some movie played in the background. Sarah involuntarily listened. She wondered what they were discussing. Maybe they were making plans for the summer? The last quarter was starting. It would fly by quickly. And then, the long-awaited long summer holidays. Surely they would fly to the sea or go somewhere else interesting. Most likely her parents were deciding this very question right now. But picking out individual words, Sarah understood. They were talking about something completely different, not about summer vacation. "She's still a child," her mother insisted. Judging by her tone, she was arguing with her father. Unheard of, usually there was always complete agreement between her parents. "What do you mean she's little?" her father objected. "She's a teenager now." "Exactly, and that's even worse. Teenagers are emotionally unstable. Growing up is hard enough as it is. There's no need for her to know anything right now. But she'll find out sooner or later anyway," her father persisted. "Now they know where we live. Do you think it will be better if Sarah hears the truth from them? From complete strangers? That will scare her even more." "We'll move," her mother countered. "You're being transferred to Moscow, aren't you? We've been planning to move to the capital for a long time. Now is the perfect time. Talk to your boss. Let them speed up your transfer." "Eleanor, our daughter needs to know the truth, however bitter it may be, especially now that they know our address. When they are seeking a meeting—" "No, Robert," her mother objected heatedly. "Not now. Definitely not now. We'll move this summer. And for now, Sarah and I will go to my cousin's place in Altai. She's been inviting us for a long time. You can settle everything here." "What about school?" Her father couldn't calm down. "What about school? The last quarter is always short, not serious. Nothing terrible will happen if Sarah misses this month. I'll arrange my leave tomorrow, and we'll leave." "Eleanor, I think we're making a mistake. You can't run away from the past. It's already catching up with us, breathing down our necks." "We'll see about that," her mother said confidently, and headed to the bathroom, making it clear the conversation was over. Sarah lay there trying to make sense of what she had heard. One thing was clear: they were hiding some secret from her. Something so serious, perhaps even frightening, that they were ready to take her away to a relative in Altai just so Sarah wouldn't find out about something. But what? The girl understood that asking her parents directly was useless. They would find a way to evade the answer, but wouldn't say anything. They were hiding something from her, and it was both unsettling and intriguing. Probably even more intriguing. The next evening, when Sarah returned from school and her parents from work, her mother announced the trip to Altai. "You look a little pale, tired," the woman smiled, looking into her daughter's eyes. "You need to rest and regain your strength. It's okay. You'll miss a month of school. I've already talked to the teacher. They'll give you your yearly grades." "Yes, you'll stay with your aunt," her father supported. "The nature there is breathtaking." Sarah didn't object. The idea of skipping the last quarter appealed to her. A trip instead of boring lessons. What could be better? But the girl really wanted to understand. Why did her parents suddenly need to take her so far from home? Who were they hiding from? Why were they running? What kind of truth were they hiding from her? Sarah's imagination worked at full capacity. She and her mother went to Altai by train. For all 3 days of the journey, the girl built theories. Maybe her father's business partners were threatening him? Or maybe her parents had an enemy from a distant past, because of whom they were forced to hide. What if she had some unsuccessful older brother? He grew up, became a criminal, and now for some reason showed up? Her father did say that someone found out where they lived. That's why all this fuss with the trip to Altai and the move to the capital. Sarah decided that from now on, she would deliberately go to bed late. Maybe she could overhear her mother and aunt's conversation. Surely they would discuss this situation. But the new place gave the girl so many vivid impressions and emotions that she somehow even forgot about her parents' secret. Amazing nature, new friends, even her first crush. This trip turned out to be incredibly rich and memorable for Sarah. A series of exciting events pushed anxious thoughts out of her head. As always at such moments, Sarah stopped meeting that same girl in her dreams. There was nothing surprising about this. Sarah had long noticed. When her life was filled with adventures and strong emotions, the dream friend temporarily disappeared. But then she always returned. Sarah left her aunt's place almost in tears. She had loved this wonderful place so much. The girl had already broken up with her first love. But here Sarah had made so many friends. They saw her and her mother off at the station along with her aunt and uncle. The girl never returned to her hometown. She didn't even manage to say goodbye to her friends. She and her mother went directly to Moscow, to a new apartment. Her father had settled everything in those couple of months, arranged his work transfer to the capital, found housing, organized the move. Sarah liked the new place. A spacious apartment, stylish furniture, a luxurious view from the window, and so much interesting stuff nearby, literally within walking distance. Red Square, a huge zoo, the Tretyakov Gallery, amusement parks, amazing exhibitions, stunning cafes and restaurants. It was even great just walking around Moscow. Both during the day and especially in the evening, when lights lit up everywhere and music drifted through the air. Summer flew by unnoticed. It was time to go to school. Sarah was very worried about how she, the newcomer, would be received by the class. The day before September 1st, her dream friend finally came to her, for the first time in a long while. She encouragingly put her arms around Sarah's shoulders. The girl looked at her with sympathy and a quiet smile, clearly offering support. Sarah was very happy to see her. She had so much to share with her. The dream girl, as always, listened attentively to Sarah and remained silent. But nevertheless, Sarah felt a wave of warmth emanating from her, enveloping her, giving her confidence. Everything will be fine for you at the new school. This, it seemed, was what her friend was instilling in her. And so it turned out. Sarah quickly fit in with the class, and life went on as usual. It happened on a fine May evening. Sarah was returning home after classes. She was already finishing her third year at the medical academy. She was one of the most promising students in her faculty, something she was very proud of. Medicine fascinated her. Finding the cause of a patient's ailment was a kind of detective work. Sarah had loved solving complex puzzles since childhood. Unlike most of her classmates, the girl had already decided on her specialization, cardiology. The mysteries of the heart drew her in. But there was also a personal motive. Her mother. She had recently suffered a heart attack. Sarah wanted to help her and other similar patients. The girl watched the road carefully. She was driving her own car. Her father had given it to her for her 18th birthday. And for almost 2 years now, Sarah had been cruising in her car instead of jostling in a crowded bus on the way to and from the university. Traffic jams slightly spoiled the picture, but Sarah had gotten used to them and accepted them as inevitable. The girl enjoyed driving. She would turn on her favorite music, open the window to let the wind blow through the cabin and speed down the highway. Beautiful. Sarah was a very cautious driver, always strictly adhering to traffic rules, monitoring the situation. Driving gave her pleasure, but the girl never lost her vigilance behind the wheel. That evening, everything was as usual. The impact came from where Sarah least expected it, from the right. The girl, as she should have, was crossing the intersection on a green light. But the driver of an old rusted 10 with music blaring from open windows, apparently, was not going to wait for his turn. He sped through a red light. It was later revealed that the 17-year-old boy, who hadn't even gotten his license yet, had drunk heavily that evening and taken his brother's car without permission to impress his girlfriend by showing what a reckless driver he was. Well, he made an impression. He crashed into Sarah's car at high speed. With him himself, strangely enough, nothing serious happened. Only his face was slightly cut by small fragments of the windshield. But his passenger was injured. The young girl was taken to the hospital with multiple fractures. Sarah felt a powerful impact. The car spun in place. The girl realized she was trapped in iron jaws. The car body deformed and crumpled from the impact. Sarah was blocked in. She didn't feel pain as such. Shock was in effect. But as a future medical professional, she perfectly understood the severity of her injuries. A fractured femur, at least. Her spine, fortunately, seemed intact. But a deep lacerated wound had formed on her abdomen. This was the most dangerous. While waiting for rescuers and the ambulance crew, the girl watched as her light-colored t-shirt quickly soaked with blood. She had severe bleeding. Her head was spinning. Black dots and blurry blobs flickered before her eyes. People crowded around. Some guys tried to help her, extract her from the cabin. They brought tools, unscrewed something. They couldn't do it. The second car was less damaged. It flew off to the side of the road. Sarah saw the unconscious girl lying on the asphalt, and next to her, squatting, covering his face with his hands, rocked the culprit of the accident. It was slowly dawning on him what he had done. It seemed Sarah did lose consciousness for a while. She didn't remember the moment the rescuers arrived, extracted her from the mangled cabin. She didn't see the doctors who put her in the ambulance. Sarah came to herself at the moment she was being wheeled, apparently, to the operating room. The surgeons were already ready. Masks, white coats, caps. Her parents were walking hastily next to the gurney, pale, frightened, anxious. Someone had already called them, informed them of what happened, and they, of course, immediately rushed over. Sarah, strangely enough, felt neither pain nor fear. Everything happening seemed unreal, like a dream. "We need blood," Sarah heard the voice of one of the doctors right next to her ear. "It's already being brought from the blood bank. Her parents didn't match. They both have O positive, and the girl has B negative." Sarah suddenly felt herself drifting off again. Dark dots flickered before her eyes. They blurred, turning into blobs. As she sank into oblivion, the girl managed to wonder, how can that be? My mother and father have O positive, and I have B negative? That's impossible. Sarah had studied genetics and knew this for a fact. And then the girl somehow found herself immediately at the edge of a dark forest. It was the very beginning of autumn, Sarah's favorite time of year. The leaves were just beginning to turn golden. In the fields stretching before the forest, bright wildflowers dotted the landscape. Sarah inhaled with pleasure the fresh, clean air, filled with the scent of herbs. There was no doubt. This was one of those dreams. Soon she would appear here, the friend Sarah had known all her life. A wonderful dream. And now her support would be very welcome. Indeed, a slender girl in a long sundress of an amazing light blue shade appeared from behind the bushes. She was smiling, but there was some anxiety in her eyes. As always, silently, she approached Sarah. The girls sank directly into the soft grass, leaning their backs against the rough trunk of a tree. Neither spoke a word, but they understood each other perfectly without it. Now the dream girl was trying to cheer up her friend, suggesting that everything would be all right. Sarah understood. She had nothing to worry about. The dream girl was never wrong and certainly never lied. But the anxiety in her friend's eyes, that, of course, was worrying. A hidden sadness. Sarah had noticed it before. Something was clearly bothering her friend. But she, as usual, remained silent. Sarah mentally asked the girl how she was doing. She smiled back, waved her hand carelessly, as if not wanting to upset her. But Sarah saw. She perfectly understood that something was happening with her old friend. And for some reason, they were seeing each other much less often. All of this was strange. Sarah didn't know how long she had spent at the edge of the forest, sitting in the grass and admiring the fantastically beautiful sunset. Sunsets like that didn't happen in the real world. The sky blazed and shimmered with bright red, purple, and deep blue hues. The spectacle was mesmerizing, calming, relaxing. Then the girlfriend stood up, smiled goodbye, and disappeared. She didn't walk away, didn't hide behind a bush or a turn, but seemed to simply dissolve into the air. Sarah never managed to catch that moment. It seemed her friend evaporated the moment Sarah blinked. A fraction of a second was enough for her. So, the wonderful dream would end soon. It had always been this way. And indeed, Sarah opened her eyes and immediately squeezed them shut again. Bright light, white walls. Oh, she wished she could have stayed with her dream friend at the edge of the wonderful forest for just a little longer. It was so good there, so easy. And now Sarah's whole body ached. She was nauseous, and her head was spinning badly. There was a nasty taste of medicine in her mouth. A tube stuck out of her vein. An uncomfortable, pressing bandage was on her abdomen. It was even hard for the girl to breathe. Sarah spent a couple of days in intensive care. She had undergone complex surgery. It turned out she was on the verge of life and death. The surgeon later admitted he was afraid he wouldn't pull her through. But everything worked out. Soon Sarah was transferred to a regular ward. She recovered quickly. Young, healthy body, the doctor explained. In a couple of months, there wouldn't even be any traces left. This was certainly good news. In the hospital, Sarah clearly realized that she was very, very lucky. 10 minutes delay could have cost her her life. She had lost enough blood. Just a little more, and it would have been over. Speaking of blood, the girl often thought about what she had heard while losing consciousness on the gurney. The doctors said that both her parents had O-positive blood type, and she herself had B-negative. But she could not have inherited such a type and Rh factor from her mother and father. This contradicted all the laws of genetics. So what was the matter? For now, the girl decided not to ask her parents any unnecessary questions. They were so worried. Her mother and father visited her every day in the hospital, brought treats that she had nowhere to put. Sarah shared the parcels with her ward mates, and there was still a lot left over, and then Sarah was discharged. Some more time passed, and the girl returned to her former life. Studies, meeting friends, parties. As the doctor had promised, the consequences of the accident no longer made themselves felt. Everything turned out all right. Only one thing changed. The car that was in the accident was beyond repair. So her father bought his daughter a new car. This time, a small SUV. For safety, he explained his choice. If you had been in that accident in this beast, you would have only gotten off with a slight scare. Sarah didn't mind. She liked the new car much more than the old one. So stylish, powerful, big. On Sarah's 20th birthday, when the guests, relatives, and closest friends had gone home, the birthday girl and her mother were washing dishes in the kitchen. This was their long-standing tradition, celebrating Sarah's birthday with numerous relatives. The girl would gather her friends the following Saturday. But today was a warm family celebration. Some relatives had specially come to the capital for her anniversary from other cities. After all, she had a wonderful family. The conversation flowed easily and naturally. Mother and daughter discussed the celebration in detail, shared impressions, laughed and joked, made plans. "Tell me about the day you gave birth to me," Sarah suddenly asked. The question was a little provocative. The girl wanted to prompt her mother into an open conversation and finally clarify everything for herself. "I'll probably become a mother someday too. I'm interested in everything. Did it take long? What did you feel when you saw me? What was I like in the first minutes after birth?" Her mother hesitated, but quickly composed herself. "It all happened so fast and unexpectedly. I barely remember anything clearly." "I see," Sarah sighed. She realized that her mother was not being entirely frank with her. How could one forget such an event? And a long-awaited one at that. Her parents often told her how much they dreamed of a child. But years passed, and they still had no children. They had already despaired, and then, the joyful news. Sarah became a true gift of fate for them, albeit a little late. Her mother was clearly avoiding the answer now. This only strengthened Sarah's suspicions. Perhaps the girl was looking at her mother in a special way. Maybe her gaze showed distrust. Because, "No, I can't do this anymore." Her mother suddenly turned off the water and heavily sat down on a chair. "Robert, come here, to the kitchen." Her father entered with a smile on his face. He had just finished vacuuming. Seeing his wife's worried face, the man immediately became serious. "It's time to tell her everything." The woman looked at her husband. He paled slightly, shivered nervously, and then silently nodded and asked their daughter to sit down. Sarah understood that she was about to be told the very family secret whose existence she had suspected for several years. Subconsciously, the girl felt what her parents were hiding from her. She understood it when she heard the doctors talking about blood types. Putting two and two together was not difficult. "The thing is," her mother's voice trembled, and she looked helplessly at her father. He took the initiative. "Sarah, you know we love you very, very much," he said. Sarah nodded. She was absolutely sure of this. Few of her acquaintances were surrounded by such love, attention, and care as she was. "You're all grown up now," her father continued. "And of course, you have the right to know. You see, we adopted you," her mother finished for her husband. Sarah exhaled loudly. Her ears pounded. She had suspected it was so. But it was one thing to speculate, and another to know the truth. A swarm of questions immediately rushed into her head. Who are my real parents? Do you know where they live? Do I have brothers or sisters? Why did they give me up? Her parents exchanged bewildered glances. It's just that I need to know so much. I'm practically bursting with questions. It's a whole avalanche. But we don't have answers to nearly all of them." Her mother shook her head. "Your biological mother. I only know that she was a very young girl from a troubled family. A child herself. How could she have a baby? You didn't have brothers or sisters at that time. What about now? Who knows? We never met your family. We only know about them from the words of the orphanage staff." The man looked at his wife in surprise. Sarah realized she was holding something back again. "Mom, this time, please be completely honest with me," the girl requested. "Don't hide anything from me. I'm an adult. I'm ready for any truth. This won't affect how I feel about you. You are my parents. I love you very much." "Well, it wasn't exactly as I just told you," her mother confessed. "I just changed the story a little. There's an unpleasant detail for you. It's not particularly significant, really, but since you want complete honesty, then here it is. This family you were born into, they were neighbors of my grandmother, Anna Rogers, and you could say we bought you from them. I didn't want you to know about it." "Bought," Sarah repeated. A cold shiver ran down her spine at that word. "How?" "Well, as your mother already said, You were born to a young girl from a troubled family. Her father joined the conversation. She didn't have an abortion in time, and then it was too late. Grandma Eleanor's grandmother, Anna Rogers, noticed the young neighbor's belly, talked to her mother, Grandma Susan. She said they were going to give the child to an orphanage. And Grandma Anna, she suggested giving the baby, meaning you, to us. All our relatives knew how much we dreamed of a baby. And here was such an opportunity. Your family. They were poor, but healthy, strong. Good genes. Taking from an orphanage, you could get a pig in a poke. But they realized we really needed a child, her mother added to the story. They started bargaining, demanded money. And who can blame them for that? The woman was raising 5 children alone. Your biological mother, Susan, was the oldest. They were truly very, very needy. We gave them money, enough so they could improve their financial situation. And when you were born, they simply gave you to us. It was difficult later to process the documents for a child obtained this way. But we managed. We sorted everything out. You didn't spend a single day in an orphanage. And where are they now? Sarah's voice trembled. Unexpected tears welled up in her eyes. Unknown, her parents answered in unison. They left afterwards, her mother explained. Something happened there with them. Apparently they went to relatives in another city. I don't know where, and I didn't want to know. Why? Over time, I somehow came to believe that you were mine. I got used to the idea. And then, when you became a teenager, they reminded us of themselves, her father continued. Your grandmother, Grandma Susan, the mother of the girl who gave birth to you, she showed up at my work. I don't know where she got the address. She said she needed money. She demanded money, threatened to tell you everything. It was a real nightmare. That's why we moved. You and your mother went to Altai, and I sorted out all the moving issues. We were afraid that this woman, that she would somehow harm you. She had such an aggressive attitude. We were scared, to be honest. Very scared, her mother confirmed. Sarah thought. So that's what her father and mother were talking about years ago, on the eve of the move, when Sarah accidentally overheard them. The girl remembered that night in the smallest detail. That was exactly when she realized there was some secret in their family. So my blood relatives are impoverished extortionists? More likely, just desperate people, her father shrugged. They had very bad luck in life. And in any case, that has nothing to do with them, her mother smiled at the girl. We raised and brought you up. You are a wonderful person, smart, responsible, kind. You are you. And they are somewhere far away. Don't even think about them. But Sarah, of course, couldn't help thinking about her unknown relatives. The frank conversation with her parents changed a lot. Now the girl often tried to imagine her birth mother. She knew little about her. She was obviously very young, not much older than Sarah herself, and most likely still lived in poverty. Sarah probably had younger brothers and sisters, and certainly 4. Her parents said her mother was the oldest of 5 children. That's a whole bunch of relatives. Sarah adored her parents, but she often dreamed of them being younger, like her friends' mothers and fathers, and the girl had also dreamed of a sister or brothers all her childhood. And now it turned out that she had all of this. What a twist of fate. Sarah decided for herself that when she was older, she would definitely find her own. And she absolutely had to see them, to find out what they were like, what they looked like, how and where they lived, what they did. This was important. This was very important. The girl didn't get any specific information from her parents. According to them, it turned out that at some point Sarah's mother's family moved to another city, and then, many years later, her grandmother suddenly appeared and demanded money in exchange for silence. The search had to start from the city where Sarah's childhood passed. This was obvious, and she would have to do everything in secret from her parents. The girl saw that her questions caused them pain. They were already quite old, and her mother had a heart condition. No, she shouldn't worry them unnecessarily. Sarah would figure it out herself. She wasn't a child anymore. The girl went to her hometown several times. She was looking for a thread that would lead her to her blood relatives. She sifted through the archives of local maternity hospitals and children's clinics, questioned old acquaintances and friends of her parents, having previously arranged with them not to inform her mother and father about her visit. But she didn't learn much. It turned out that she was registered as a foundling and immediately handed over to the care of the people who found the baby, her father and mother. The real parents of the newborn were, of course, searched for as a formality, but naturally, they were never found. That was all. Sarah decided she wouldn't give up. Soon she would graduate from university, get a job, start earning a salary, and then she would have money for detectives. After all, she couldn't manage without professional help. 10 years of Sarah's life flew by unnoticed from the moment she made the firm decision to find her birth mother. The girl changed a lot. She graduated from university with honors, got a job. Almost immediately, she had a romance with a colleague, a young and promising head of the surgical department, Michael. It was true love. The young people didn't delay. They had a noisy, fun wedding with a crowd of elegantly dressed guests, a toastmaster, decorated cars, and other festive attributes. Sarah's parents were happy. They had raised their daughter, educated her, and now married her off. Now they could relax and wait for grandchildren. Sarah and Michael decided not to rush with children. The girl wanted to establish herself in her profession. She liked being a doctor. She hadn't been mistaken. Cardiology really turned out to be her life's work. But still, 3 years after the wedding, the family grew. Sarah and Michael had wonderful twin daughters. The young parents decided to surprise the grandparents. They didn't tell them until the birth that there would be 2 children. Everyone was so surprised at the discharge, but happy, of course. Sarah's mother even shed a tear. What a miracle! I couldn't believe my eyes. Michael's mother-in-law examined the newborn granddaughters. Double happiness. No one in our family has ever had twins. Perhaps this good fortune came to the family through your side. Sarah smiled and didn't answer. Michael's parents didn't know her story. Not because the girl was ashamed of it. She just didn't want to involve people in such details unnecessarily. She herself didn't know if there had been twins in her family line. Sarah enjoyed motherhood. It was difficult, but the grandparents actively helped. The girls grew, delighting relatives on both sides. Sarah's mother, looking at her granddaughters, sometimes couldn't hold back tears. To think, what happiness, I've lived to see grandchildren. But the happiness for the elderly woman was short-lived. Age, a bad heart. One day Sarah's mother had another heart attack, and this time they couldn't save her. Sarah took the loss hard. The person who had done so much for her, who had loved her so much, was gone. The orphaned Sarah was supported by her husband, in-laws, and friends. The little ones constantly needed their mother and didn't let her fall into apathy. And yet, it was her father who pulled Sarah out of her stupor. One day she noticed how old and drawn her father had become, and realized that he needed help and support far more than she did. Since then, Sarah came to her parents' apartment every day. In the morning, she put her daughters in the car and drove to her father's. Together they played with the children, remembered the past, cooked, cleaned, and looked at photographs. There were many of them, several thick, worn albums. Sarah wondered why these pictures hadn't attracted her attention before. After all, they were the living visual history of her family. Here was her mother, a very young first-year student, so cheerful, carefree. And here was her father, a young intern, serious, thoughtful, focused. One of Sarah's daughters was strikingly similar to her grandfather in this. The woman sometimes even forgot that they didn't share genes. Often her father would take the little ones and go out into the yard with them. Sarah admired from the window how happily they played together. The elderly man literally blossomed next to his granddaughters. They gave him strength and energy to keep living. During this time, Sarah tidied up and bustled in the kitchen. Her father was not used to managing the household on his own. He said he didn't need much for himself. But still, his daughter tried very hard, cooked his favorite dishes. True, they didn't turn out as tasty as her mother's, but it was still better than nothing. So many significant events and changes had occurred in Sarah's life over the past decades, both good, joyful ones, and sad, even tragic ones. It was no wonder that the woman had put aside the idea of searching for her blood relatives for a while. No, she always remembered it, but she didn't have time for family secrets. So many worries, so many incidents, so many problems that needed to be solved urgently. Her dream friend came to Sarah less and less often. Now she appeared once every 3 or 4 months. And of course, she grew up with Sarah. They still didn't talk, but they understood each other perfectly without words and were very happy to meet. One fine May day, Sarah was sitting on the sofa in her parents' apartment, her legs tucked under her, flipping through an album. Through the open window came the cheerful voices of her daughters. They had started an active game with their grandfather. He was all for it. Her father had told Sarah more than once that the granddaughters kept him in shape, didn't let him get down. Sarah smiled, looking at the old pictures. She hadn't seen these before. Black and white, with a decorative frame. They were over half a century old, almost antiques. Nevertheless, the photographs still held the smell of printing ink. One of the pictures particularly caught Sarah's attention. In it, she noticed her mother at the age of 12 or 13. It was definitely her. Sarah recognized the large, wide-open eyes, curly hair, and a mole on her cheek. Sarah had seen few photos of her mother at that age, so she was now looking at this old picture with interest. The girl mother sat surrounded by adults, probably her parents and some older relatives. An interesting thought suddenly occurred to Sarah. In the past, people signed the back of photographs with the names of those depicted and made other important notes. The year of the picture, the place. The woman took the photograph out of the album, turned it over. Just as she thought. In neat handwriting on the yellowed cardboard, someone had written, from left to right, Helen, John Samin, Zoe, Anna, little Eleanor, Alexeyevka, July 1959. Little Eleanor was the girl, meaning Sarah's mother. Anna was her maternal grandmother, Anna Rogers. Her mother said she named her only daughter after her beloved grandmother. The woman didn't know the other people. Maybe her parents had told her about these relatives once, but who would have listened carefully then? And Alexeyevka, apparently, was the name of the very village where Sarah was born. That's where her blood relatives once lived. Her parents told her that Sarah was born to a young neighbor of her mother's grandmother, Anna Rogers, the very Anna who was in the photograph. Grandma Anna helped her granddaughter, Eleanor, and her husband become parents. It was no wonder they named their daughter after her. Everything fit. It turned out that Sarah's birthplace was Alexeyevka itself. Maybe people who knew her relatives still lived there? Sarah closed the album and exhaled heavily. Alexeyevka. That's where she needed to start her search. The desire to find her biological mother, which had been dormant for some time, was revived with new force. Sarah realized she could no longer sit idly by. It was time to learn the truth about her relatives, however bitter, however unpleasant it might be. It was scary, of course, but how could she live on without knowing her roots? She had to find out about her birth family, if only for her daughters. At home, Sarah shared her thoughts with Michael. Her husband always supported his beloved wife in everything. Of course, he knew her difficult story. "I'm with you," the man simply replied after listening to Sarah. "When do we leave?" The woman smiled. She didn't expect any other reaction from Michael. With him, she wasn't afraid of anything. They would overcome everything. It was decided to go the very next weekend. What was the point of delaying? The sooner Sarah knew the truth, the better. All preparatory measures were taken during the week. Michael arranged for his parents to take the granddaughters for 2 days. Sarah found out where Alexeyevka was located and how to get there. And she also filled her car's gas tank to the brim. On the eve of the fateful trip, the woman couldn't fall asleep. Her heart pounded. Her arms and legs felt like cotton. Michael had long been peacefully snoring on his side of the bed, while she just stared at the ceiling. Sarah didn't understand herself. What did she want more? To find her birth family in Alexeyevka and meet the people who had once sold her to strangers? Or not to find any trace of her biological mother in this village at all? In the morning, Sarah and Michael were already driving along the country highway. The woman was sitting in the passenger seat. In that state, she shouldn't have been driving. Sarah was so nervous that she occasionally trembled. Michael, seeing his wife's anxiety, tried his best to cheer her up. Fields, meadows, and tree plantations ran along both sides of the highway. From time to time, villages and settlements flashed by. The couple had left when it was just getting light. They reached Alexeyevka closer to lunchtime. The sun was already high in the sky. "Well, here we are." Michael parked the car near a modest sign with the village name. It was a small settlement with deserted, narrow streets. The houses here were varied. Some were very small, crooked, blackened with time, and others were sturdy, quite modern, with satellite dishes under the roofs. "And how do we find the right house?" Sarah asked in confusion. "Asking doesn't hurt," Michael replied carelessly, and confidently moved forward. Sarah hurried after him. First, they simply walked around the village, looked closely. Sarah looked around in surprise. She had never been to such a place. Quiet, sparsely populated, calm, even somewhat sleepy. Curious chickens scurried in the road dust, and cautious cats slunk around. Muffled conversations came from some yards. The smells of homemade food, mixed with the scents of sun-heated herbs, filled the air. Soon the couple came out to a spacious clearing, something like a square. And here they finally met people. Several old people sat on a bench under a sprawling tall tree and discussed something. Women in colorful calico dresses chatted on the porch of a shop. Toddlers clung to the skirts of 2 of them. A little further away, near a building that looked like a warehouse, a group of children played. Boys and girls tanned almost black, dirty and barefoot. "Well, here are the locals," Michael concluded. The people noticed the strangers and openly stared at them, glancing secretly, observing the rules of decency. But of course, these looks could not escape Sarah and Michael. The children behaved more openly, abandoned their game, and curiously looked at the newcomers. Yes, it was clear that Alexeyevka was not often graced by the presence of visitors. Michael approached the women on the porch, smiled charmingly, and greeted them. "Hello to you too," one of the ladies responded. "Who have you come here to see?" "Not anyone specific," Michael began to explain. "We just want to find one house. My wife's great-grandmother's house, just out of interest." The woman's name was Anna Rogers. "Maybe you remember Grandma Anna?" "Grandma Anna?" responded a red-haired woman with bright green eyes. A chubby little boy, also red-haired and covered in freckles, clung tightly to her hand. "Of course we remember her. She was good, kind. She just adored us children. She really dreamed of great-grandchildren. She didn't have any then. So you, it turns out, are her great-granddaughter? The oldest woman in the group examined Sarah closely with her eyes. The others were younger, around 35 to 40 at most. This one could be a mother to one of them. Yes, I'm her great-granddaughter. I want to see where my great-grandmother lived, learn more about my roots. Sarah noticed that the women were whispering and looking at her strangely. It was unpleasant. The house is on the 3rd street from here, on Flower Street, number 19, the elderly woman replied. But no one lives there anymore. It's been empty since old Anna died. Your parents couldn't sell it. Who wants to move to our remote village? No fools were found. Michael and Sarah thanked the women for the information and moved on. Why were they looking at me like that? Sarah wondered. Did you notice? They almost drilled holes in you with their eyes. Nothing surprising. A new face, and a relative of their fellow villager whom everyone knew. People are just curious. Don't worry about it. But they were whispering about something, Sarah continued. I heard something like, looks like 2 peas in a pod, and blood is thicker than water. Who do they think I look like? Not Grandma Anna, surely. As it turns out, we don't even have any genes in common. Well, maybe they don't know that story? Michael shrugged. So they saw a resemblance. I don't know. It seems to me that such an event would be hard to hide in a village. Most likely people know. Perhaps. Then it's even clearer why they were staring. And here's the house we need. Michael pointed to a leaning fence. Beyond the time-worn fence lay an overgrown garden. Weeds, unimpeded by anything, had taken over the entire area. They had even managed to grow on the roof of the time-blackened shed. In the center of this green sea stood a small house. Once, perhaps, it had been painted bright blue. Now the paint had faded and peeled. The windows were broken. The door hung on one hinge. It was clear that everything inside had long been covered in dust and cobwebs. Surely it was a paradise for insects and small animals. I don't really want to go in there, Sarah shook her head. I don't like any of this. Yeah, I don't feel like it either, Michael agreed. He took a few photos of the house and garden, and then added, But we didn't come here for this house, did we? We need to find information about your relatives. That is, to find the house where they once lived. I understood it was the neighbors across the street, Sarah said and turned around. My mother, when she told me, said exactly that. The neighbor's house across from Grandma's. Michael also turned around. Now both of them were looking at the other house. It was small, somewhat dilapidated, but clearly inhabited. Trimmed grass, curtains on the windows, a forgotten book on a bench in the garden, several neat beds, carrots, onions, peppers. Someone definitely lived here. What should we do? Sarah asked, looking at Michael. We'll just knock and ask who lives here. Great idea, Michael approved and moved towards the gate. Sarah stopped her husband. Maybe we should just watch for a while? Wait until someone appears in the garden or at the gate, and then approach. It feels a bit awkward otherwise. Whatever you say, Michael didn't argue. But we could be sitting here until evening. Who knows? Maybe the people are at work. But Sarah insisted. Meeting the inhabitants of the house scared her. After all, they could be her relatives. Or conversely, people who knew absolutely nothing about them. Then the search would hit a dead end. Which option was better? Sarah didn't have an answer to that question yet. The couple sat down on a sun-warmed boulder by the fence of the abandoned house on Flower Street. Around them stood poor little houses. Many, like Sarah's great-grandmother's dwelling, were empty and overgrown with weeds. Poverty and desolation. A sad sight. Sarah tried to imagine this street in the past, when it was still alive and inhabited. Probably children's voices rang out here, boys on bicycles darted back and forth, and lines with drying colorful clothes were hung in the yards. Now this area resembled a ghost town, a And yet, someone still remained here. Sarah didn't know how long she and Michael had sat like this, intently watching the neighbor's house. Probably more than an hour had passed. At least the sun was already beginning to set. Her husband seemed to have even dozed off. Sarah didn't disturb him. As always, she fantasized, imagining different scenarios. And for some reason, all of them frightened her. She certainly didn't expect what happened next. The door of the little house opposite suddenly quietly opened. A woman in a wheelchair appeared on the porch. She rolled down the makeshift wooden ramp from the porch and quickly wheeled towards the bench where the forgotten book lay. Sarah nudged Michael with her elbow. He opened his eyes and also stared at the resident of the old house. She had just turned her back to them. It was time to act. The couple got up from their spot and approached the fence. "Hello," Michael said in the friendliest tone he could muster. Sarah also greeted her. The woman turned around, looked at the visitors with curiosity. Sarah and Michael exhaled in surprise. The resident of the house made a similar sound. Her eyebrows shot up sharply. Her eyes widened. Sarah grabbed her husband's hand to keep from falling. Disbelieving her eyes, she looked at the woman in the wheelchair, while the woman stared intently at her. "This just can't be," flashed through Sarah's mind. This was her dream friend, the very one she had known all her life. They had grown up and changed together. This was simply incredible. "Finally," Michael broke the silence. "I don't understand anything. You look so alike. An amazing resemblance." The man didn't express himself quite accurately. Sarah and the woman in the wheelchair didn't just resemble each other, they were exact copies. The same eyes, nose, and lips, slightly curly light brown hair. Both slender and tall, and even their tans were the same shade, coffee with milk. "Is that really you?" the woman said, stunned. A joyful sparkle appeared in her eyes. "I don't believe this. Come in, guests." They didn't make her wait. "Maybe you'd like some tea or water. I have compote in the fridge, too." Sarah shook her head negatively. She still hadn't regained her power of speech. "Please sit down," the hostess continued to fuss. "You can sit here on the bench. You can go to the backyard. I have a gazebo there." Michael led Sarah to the bench by the wall of the little house and helped her settle down. He sat down next to her. The woman wheeled up to them and again began to look at Sarah, this time with a gentle smile on her face. "So this is what you're like. I imagined you just like this. Who are you?" Sarah looked up at the woman. The warm smile of the house resident encouraged her, helped her compose herself. "Well, let's get acquainted. My name is Mary. I'm your twin sister. We're twins, as you can easily guess by our appearance." "You're just copies of each other," Michael exclaimed. "Like clones." Monozygotic twins are essentially clones. The doctor and Sarah woke up. "Educational moment," Michael teased his wife good-naturedly. "Well, now let's figure out your complicated story. That's why we came here, right?" "Yes," Sarah picked up, looking into Mary's eyes. "Tell me everything you know." "My parents, the people who raised me, they hid the truth from me for a long time. And even after that, they didn't like talking about it." "There's nothing unexpected about that," Mary shrugged. "If I were your parents, I'd probably act exactly the same way." "Well, my grandmother, Grandma Susan, told me everything. Not right away. I was already an adult. Grandma knew she wouldn't be around much longer. She didn't want to take this story with her." Sarah suddenly did what she had wanted to do for a long time. She took her sister's hand. Both felt as if they had been struck by a charge. The women looked at each other, smiled broadly, and hugged. It felt so natural, so effortless, as if there hadn't been long years of separation. In her sister's embrace, Sarah felt warm and calm. Mary, apparently, felt the same way. In some inexplicable way, Sarah understood her sister's feelings. Perhaps this was the amazing connection between twins. Michael watched the women and couldn't help but smile. Then he took out his phone and took a few pictures. For memory, he explained to the twins. This moment is just too interesting. Indian soap operas have nothing on this. Both women smiled cheerfully. By the way, our story really is more interesting than any Indian soap opera, Mary remarked and began her story. Many years ago, a large family lived in this very house. A single mother, Susan, with 5 children. There wasn't enough money to feed such a crowd. The woman worked from morning till night. She was a cleaner on the collective farm, and then she also worked as a dishwasher in the local canteen. And she did odd jobs too. Sometimes she did piecework, sometimes weeded someone's garden, sometimes helped clean a yard. She was constantly busy, but the family still lived in poverty. Susan's husband had disappeared long ago. He went to the capital for work and was never heard from again. Either something happened to him, or he decided to start a new life. The woman didn't rule out the second option either. Whatever the case, she was left completely alone with 5 children to raise. Her eldest daughter, Stacy, was initially a support for her mother. She looked after her younger brothers and sisters, cleaned the house, even cooked. Any work she did quickly and well. She was a clever girl, capable, and good at housekeeping. Her mother couldn't praise Stacy enough. And then the girl grew up, and it was as if she had been replaced. From a compliant, home-loving child, Stacy turned into a prickly, difficult teenager. Grandma Susan said that Stacy, our mother, started demanding expensive clothes and money for entertainment. And she also insulted her mother for not being able to provide a normal life for her children. Stacy suddenly wanted a beautiful life. She dreamed of dressing fashionably, going to the city for discos, using expensive cosmetics. Of course, a cleaner mother couldn't fulfill the desires of her rapidly growing daughter. Susan hoped that Stacy's behavior was nothing more than teenage rebellion. She knew that sometimes growing up was difficult for children, and hoped that with time, her daughter would be her old self again. But the older the girl got, the worse the problem became. Her mother couldn't provide Stacy with a beautiful life. The girl acted out for a bit and then accepted the fact. Yes, she was from a poor family. Her mother didn't even have money for proper food and clothes for the children. And that meant she had to find other sponsors. That was all. Young, attractive Stacy, of course, found them without difficulty. It was enough to show up at a city disco in a miniskirt one day. The teenage girl acquired older admirers and new friends. Stacy looked like a grown woman, dressed and behaved accordingly. But in essence, she was still a child who knew nothing of life. Her mother's heart ached with fear and anxiety for her eldest daughter. But she couldn't do anything with Stacy. She didn't respect her at all. Should she tie the girl to a radiator? Susan tried, of course, to influence her wayward child. She scolded her daughter, punished her, even locked her in the house. But she always ran away, found a way to slip out, and towards adventures and a beautiful, fun life. Sometimes Stacy would disappear for days in the city, then show up at home. She smelled of cigarettes, strong perfume. The girl's whole appearance indicated that she had clearly developed a fondness for drinking. Her mother desperately tried to reason with her wayward child, gave examples from life, scared her with possible consequences, told her how cruel people could be. But Stacy only smirked. She lived a fun, free, bright life. Her new friends had money, and they denied the young beauty nothing. Of course, she also had to pay in some sense. But this didn't bother Stacy. The girl started disappearing from home more often. Her absences became longer. And then one day a neighbor, whose children studied in the city, reported that Stacy was living with some man as his wife. Now the girl didn't appear in Alexeyevka at all, only occasionally called to say she was all right. Meanwhile, Susan was beside herself with worry, sensing trouble in her heart. Stacy was living with an adult man who had come to their city from another country to work. What if he took her daughter far, far away, and she would never see her again? Or something even worse would happen. People said that this man drank heavily, and the woman knew nothing else about her young daughter's chosen one. Several months passed, and then one dark February night, there was a knock at the door. Her daughter stood on the threshold, gaunt, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and a huge belly that her winter coat no longer buttoned over. It turned out that Stacy's man had returned to his homeland, where he already had a family. He had no plans to leave his wife or abandon his children. And then there was Stacy with her pregnancy. He sent the girl for an abortion. She wasn't against it, but at the hospital, it turned out that the time limit had passed. She would have to give birth. The prospective father preferred to return home, to his own. He didn't need all these problems. Stacy went to her mother in Alexeyevka. Where else could she go? She didn't know how to work, and she didn't want to. Life in the city was expensive. Susan, despite the circumstances, was happy about her daughter's return. First she fed her, then hugged her tightly. They even cried together. Times were tough. The family lived hand to mouth. Susan worked tirelessly, but they were paid little, and sometimes wages were delayed altogether. More and more often, the woman thought that they wouldn't be able to afford Stacy's baby, especially since the girl with a small child wouldn't be able to go to work for a long time. And the family was already barely making ends meet. The younger children were even teased at school for their shabby, worn clothes and lack of necessary supplies. The problem solved itself. One evening, a neighbor, old Anna Rogers, came to visit. As always, she brought treats for the children: hot cabbage pies, some candy, a jar of raspberry jam. And then she started a long and serious conversation with the hostess. Everyone in the village knew that Ellie, Anna Rogers' granddaughter, couldn't have a child. She had been married for a long time, but still no children. She had even gotten treatment somewhere, but it didn't help. And they were such a good, well-off family. The young couple lived in a large apartment. Both spouses' salaries were more than decent. And they had a car, and they flew to the sea every year for vacation. They could give their child everything, show them the world, shower them with toys and beautiful clothes. But years passed, and there was still no baby. Susan sighed heavily. They, on the other hand, had plenty of that commodity. Children, that is. Look, another one was coming soon. How were they going to raise them, feed them? There were more questions than answers. And why was everything in the world arranged so strangely and unfairly? And then Anna Rogers laid out her plan. She offered a large sum of money for Stacy's baby, who was about to be born. Ellie and her husband Robert would adopt it. At first, Susan reacted to the offer defensively. How could that be? What kind of barbarity? Anna Rogers suggested calming down and thinking about it, not deciding hastily, discussing it with her daughter. And she left, leaving the neighbors time to think. Susan was categorically against the old woman's offer. But Stacy? It turned out she had overheard her mother's conversation with Anna Rogers, and the neighbor's offer interested her greatly. Just think, she persuaded her mother. It will be good for everyone. We'll get rid of an extra mouth to feed. Ellie will get her long-awaited child, and we'll get money, which is absolutely essential right now. Giving away your own flesh and blood to strangers. Susan shook her head doubtfully. How will I live with that afterwards? What's the big deal? Stacy insisted. We're not sending it to an orphanage where orphans have a hard time. It will live in a rich family. Just imagine. It will have everything it needs for happiness. And what can we give a child? It will cry just like my younger siblings, being teased at school for patches on its clothes. In the end, Stacy convinced her mother. Susan went to Anna Rogers and informed her that they agreed. A few weeks later, Stacy went into labor. Right at home, almost a month earlier than expected. That's why the girl didn't manage to go to the hospital beforehand, as had been agreed. Everything happened rapidly. Susan had to deliver the baby herself. Fortunately, she had given birth to 5 and had some idea of what was what. And then everyone was in for a surprise. Twins were born, 2 girls at once. Anna Rogers, hearing the news, was delighted. All the better then, she smiled, looking at the 2 wailing babies. There will be 2 children in the family right away. But soon it turned out that one of the girls was not healthy. Ellie and Robert came to pick up the children with a doctor. He examined the babies and delivered his verdict. One infant is perfectly fine, no abnormalities. But the second, the doctor picked up tiny Mary. This girl has big problems. Most likely she will never be able to move. Everything indicates damage to the central nervous system. Consequences of premature birth, and possibly the child suffered from oxygen deprivation during pregnancy. This happens when the mother leads an unhealthy lifestyle. Stacy lowered her eyes to the floor, and she knew perfectly well what kind of lifestyle she had led during pregnancy. Robert and Ellie refused to take the sick girl. They were upset, of course. Ellie even cried a little. The couple had already planned to become parents of 2 little ones at once. They had even prepared a room for the twins. But raising a disabled child, they were not ready for that. So Mary remained with her birth family. Sarah went to the city. Grandma Susan said that at first they wanted to give me to an orphanage, Mary recalled. They even filled out the documents. Stacy just needed to write a refusal. Grandma was scared. She didn't think she could cope with such a difficult child. There wasn't enough money for the healthy ones, and a disabled person needs medicine and rehabilitation. Stacy was just happy to give the child away. She didn't need a healthy daughter. And then this. The doctors who examined little Mary all gave unfavorable prognoses. The examination results showed that Mary would most likely be a vegetable who couldn't walk, talk, or understand much. Susan cried into her pillow at night. It was hard for her to think that her granddaughter was born like this. She was her own flesh and blood after all. The doctors urged her to send the girl to a boarding school for the disabled, explaining that Mary wouldn't care where she was. And Susan had almost decided. She was swaddling her granddaughter's limp body, getting her ready for the trip to the boarding school, and crying. Suddenly, a sad song about an orphan boy surfaced from the depths of her memory. And Susan began to sing it, looking at the defenseless baby who would soon find herself among strangers. The woman's heart was breaking with pity for her granddaughter, but they had no choice. And suddenly Mary looked directly into Susan's eyes. The sounds of the melody clearly captivated the child. The baby's gaze focused, as if filled with meaning, and the girl smiled. It wasn't a reflex muscle contraction, but a real smile, directed at a loving relative. The girl was clearly reacting to what was happening, and she really liked the song. "You're no vegetable." The grandmother gently picked up the newborn, smiling at her. "I won't give you to anyone." So Mary stayed with the family. The doctors were wrong. The girl's problems turned out not to be so terrible. Stacy didn't approve of her mother's actions. She had already managed to write the refusal. But Susan stood her ground. You can't give a child to an orphanage, especially since she understands everything. Her intellect seems to be fine. But her legs and arms are indeed weak. It will be hard for such a child in strange surroundings. How could she live knowing that her own flesh and blood was suffering somewhere? Stacy just waved away her mother's arguments, but didn't argue much. She had already started a new romance. If her mother wanted a toy, let her fuss over it. What did Stacy care? She was being invited to live in the city again. Stacy fluttered off to a new life. She had everything she wanted again: money, friends, drinks, admirers, and Susan raised her younger children and granddaughter, struggling with all her might. But she didn't complain about her fate. She had made her own choice. The woman never regretted her decision. Little Mary filled her heart with tenderness and pity. The girl grew up smart and beautiful. But at the proper time, the little one didn't take her first steps. Her arms were also weak, but at least they worked. But her legs, they didn't move at all. After 4 years, it became clear that Mary would never be able to walk. A foundation for children with disabilities raised money for a wheelchair. It was painful for Susan to see the child in such a device. The chair seemed to dispel the illusion that Mary was a normal, healthy girl, officially making her disabled. But Mary herself was happy with the purchase. Of course, after all, now she had the opportunity to move. Time passed. Mary grew up. She even managed to go to school. By that time, the girl was completely comfortable in her wheelchair. In class, Mary turned out to be one of the best students, and she also made many friends. The children loved their classmate for her kind disposition and cheerful, easygoing nature. They found the well-read Mary interesting. She instantly came up with so many games and activities. Susan's children grew up and moved away, and she and Mary were left alone. Grandmother and granddaughter lived soul to soul. Sometimes Stacy would appear. Susan noted with bitterness that the wild lifestyle affected both her daughter's appearance and personality. The once young and beautiful girl had turned into an untidy, fading woman with a swollen face and a hoarse, smoke-filled voice. Susan worried about her daughter, afraid that such a life would not lead her to anything good. And so it happened. When Mary was in 6th grade, a tragedy occurred. A fire broke out in the apartment where Stacy was living at the time with her latest boyfriend. One of the guests fell asleep with a cigarette right on the sofa. Well, all the drinking companions died in the fire. Apparently, they were in such a state that they didn't even notice the fire. Susan later read in the report that none of these people tried to save themselves. This was a heavy blow for Mary. Yes, she and Stacy had never been particularly close, but the girl knew she had a mother, loved her, and hoped that Stacy would sooner or later get her act together. And now there was nothing left to hope for. Susan and Mary grieved over what happened for a long time. But time passed, and both had to pull themselves together and return to normal life. And then, a new blow. Susan began to notice that she tired quickly. She had completely lost her appetite. The woman lost weight. Neighbors and Mary literally forced her to see a doctor. Susan initially waved it off, saying she was just overtired, nothing hurt, and therefore there was nothing to worry about. But then she finally gave in to persuasion, especially since her own condition did worry her. It seemed somehow strange, unusual. It turned out to be cancer, like a bolt from the blue. Susan was scared not for herself, but for her granddaughter. She was still a child, defenseless, a naive teenager. Susan couldn't leave her, absolutely couldn't. The doctor's prognoses were grim. With such a disease, the maximum lifespan was 1 or 2 years. But Susan surprised everyone. She lived until her granddaughter's 18th birthday. The woman diligently underwent treatment, followed all the doctor's recommendations, prayed. Mary had no one else but her. Mary tried to help her grandmother as much as she could. She learned to do everything around the house, knew which pills Susan had to take at what time. Grandmother and granddaughter clung to each other, cared for each other, and talked a lot. During this difficult period, Susan told her granddaughter everything. She decided that the girl should know the truth. She didn't want to take these secrets to her grave. When I found out I had a twin sister, I was very happy and understood a lot, Mary said, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. You might think I'm crazy right now, but from early childhood, a friend, my exact copy, came to me in my dreams. At first, she was a girl, but as I grew, she grew. When Grandma Susan told me about my sister, I realized that it was most likely her. After all, there is a connection between twins. Perhaps in our case, it manifested itself precisely like this, in these dreams. Sarah looked seriously at her sister. In those dreams, you were without a wheelchair and could walk, right? Yes, Mary nodded. And you? You mean, yes, Sarah nodded. I also had those dreams. Now I understand that we were in touch all this time. It's amazing. It's like a miracle. I agree, Mary said. Perhaps it can be explained somehow from a scientific point of view. Sarah shook her head. People just haven't discovered these channels of communication yet. It's all ahead. I looked forward to those dreams so much, Mary confessed. I dreamed of seeing you again. Me too. Only lately, for some reason, you've been appearing in my dreams less and less. Maybe the connection weakens over time. But now we don't need that channel anymore. Come visit whenever you want. Mary smiled. Girls, I'm listening to you, and I can't believe this is all true. Michael looked stunned. And your meeting, and now the dreams too. Anything can happen in life, Mary smiled. Her face shone with happiness. The sisters held hands. So, you were completely alone at 18? Sarah clarified. I can't imagine that. At that age, I was still a child, living with my parents in my childhood room, studying at university. And you, it turns out, managed entirely on your own? I had to, Mary nodded. Of course, the neighbors helped me a lot. Sometimes uncles and aunts would come to visit. But overall, yes, independent life began. I managed. Grandma Susan, worried about me unnecessarily. She thought I would be completely lost without her. She was very worried about that. That's why she once tracked down your parents in the city. She told me about it later, several years after that meeting, knowing she didn't have long left. Susan had been very worried about her granddaughter. Mary couldn't walk, couldn't work. It was good that she had learned to take care of herself and do housework. The disability payments were tiny. There were no relatives nearby. The world was cruel. The girl would be lost. And so one day Susan decided on a desperate step. She tracked down Ellie and Robert in the city. The woman reasoned, as it seemed to her, quite logically. The couple was raising Mary's sister. Not just a sister, but a twin. Perhaps these people would sympathize with Mary's fate, pity her, take her into their family. Back then, many years ago, the doctor had said Mary would be severely disabled. Ellie and Robert were scared. They didn't take the sick child. But in reality, it wasn't so bad. Little Mary only had trouble with her legs. Susan knew that in the city, such children lived normal, full lives. Maybe Mary could even still be helped. Who knows? Anna Rogers was no longer alive. But still, Susan got Robert's work address from one of the neighbors, and one morning, saying she was going to the hospital, went straight to him. Grandma Susan, didn't tell me the details of that conversation, Mary recalled. She only said that nothing came of it. Robert and Ellie categorically refused even to meet me. And then they moved to Moscow altogether. You can understand them, of course. They would have had to not only take in a disabled girl, but also tell you the truth. My parents told me a completely different story, Sarah said. Apparently they were demanding money for their silence, threatening to tell me who I really was. That doesn't sound like Grandma Susan at all, Mary shook her head. But I can assume she was desperate, and that's why she spoke to your parents that way. She had to arrange my future no matter what. Maybe she went too far. It's a shame Mom and Dad got scared back then. Sarah frowned slightly. They are generally very kind, attentive, and caring, and they were probably afraid of my reaction to the truth. They were protecting me. Because of that, we lost so much time with you. Now we'll make up for it, Mary smiled. You will come to visit me, won't you? We'll communicate in reality now, not just in dreams. I have an idea about that, Michael intervened. Mary, have you ever thought about moving to the city? No, the woman replied. Where would I live there? Let's say there is housing. Would you move? There is housing, Sarah chimed in. Michael, you mean… Yes, my grandmother's apartment, Michael explained. She can't live alone anymore, and she doesn't want to move in with my parents. She needs someone to give her medication on time, cook for her. We can't find a caregiver she likes. She says they're strangers. She's afraid of them. And you're as close as family. What do you think about this? Can you handle it? We'll pay you a good salary. Say yes, Sarah urged. Michael's grandmother lives in the next building. She's very nice, and you'll get along. And she definitely won't be afraid of you when she finds out you're my twin sister. What's there to think about? Nothing keeps me here at all. Of course I agree. Super, Michael smiled. Sarah hugged her sister without a word. It was a warm August evening. An unusual company moved along the wide street, attracting everyone's attention. Two absolutely identical young, beautiful women in stylish sky blue sundresses, one of them in a wheelchair, and two identical little girls in bright dresses. The little ones were animatedly talking with both women. The sisters held ice cream in their hands. And I kept wondering where I suddenly got twins from. Sarah chuckled. Turns out I'm a twin myself. I look at my beloved nieces and think that you and I could have been just as happy in childhood, Mary said. I missed you very much. And I missed you. But the main thing is, everything is good now. Everything was indeed good now.